The smell of stale coffee and my stepfather's cologne is the last thing I remember from that morning. The kind of cologne that costs too much and says nothing kind about the man wearing it. I was 28 when I found out the truth about my own birthday, but I need to start where it actually began. On the morning I turned 18, in the back seat of a car that was taking me somewhere I never asked to go. I'd spent the night before staring at my ceiling, doing what I always did before birthdays in that house, hoping for something I couldn't name. Not a party. Not even a card, really. Just one look that said I mattered. I'd waited 17 years of birthdays for that look and gotten cake and silence instead, every single time. That morning, my mother knocked on my door before sunrise. "Pack light," she said. "A few days' worth." Her voice had a strange flatness to it, like she was reading lines off a card she'd memorized but didn't believe. I asked where we were going. She didn't answer. I'd learned by then that questions in that house were like throwing rocks into a well and never hearing them land. So I packed a bag and got dressed and told myself, maybe, finally, this was the year they surprised me. My stepfather drove. He always drove like the road owed him something, fast and tight-jawed, both hands choking the wheel. My mother sat beside him with her purse in her lap, and her eyes fixed somewhere past the windshield, somewhere that wasn't me. Nobody turned on the radio. Nobody said a word for 40 minutes, and I sat in the back watching the highway signs change, watching them start to point toward the airport, and something in my chest lifted despite myself. A trip. Maybe they'd finally planned something. Maybe this was it, the year. We pulled up to departures and my stepfather left the engine running. That should have told me everything right there. You don't leave the engine running for a hug goodbye. My mother reached into her purse without turning around and held an envelope over the seat back until I took it from her hand. Inside was a boarding pass, one way. A town I'd never heard of, somewhere in the hill country outside Asheville, North Carolina, a place called Larkspur Hollow. I looked up, and that's when my stepfather finally spoke, in a voice so rehearsed it barely sounded like his own. "This is your gift. Happy birthday. Don't call us when you land, and don't come back." My mother never turned around, not once. Not when I said her name, not when my voice cracked on it the second time. She just sat there with her hands folded like she was waiting out a sermon she didn't want to hear, and then my stepfather popped the trunk, and that was my cue. I got out. I pulled my one bag from the trunk. I hadn't even gotten it onto my shoulder before the car pulled away from the curb. No brake lights, no glance in the mirror, nothing. Just gone, swallowed into airport traffic like I'd never been there at all. I want to say I held it together. I didn't. I sat down hard on a bench outside the terminal doors, and I cried the kind of crying that makes strangers walk faster past you, the kind where your whole ribcage shakes and you can't get a full breath in. People looked away. A skycap asked if I was okay, and I couldn't even answer him, just nodded with my face wet and my hands shaking around a boarding pass to nowhere. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to climb higher. Long enough for something inside me to go quiet in a way that scared me more than the crying had, a kind of numbness that settled over everything like snow. I wiped my face with my sleeve, picked up my bag, and walked inside. Because somewhere underneath the numbness was a small, stubborn voice telling me that sitting on that bench wasn't going to change anything, and at least inside there was air conditioning and a reason to keep moving. I checked in. I went through security with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I sat at the gate and stared at that boarding pass like it might rearrange itself into an explanation if I looked hard enough. It never did. But when they called my zone, I got on the plane anyway, because there was nothing behind me worth turning back for. And for the first time in my life, that thought didn't terrify me. It steadied me. The flight was short, just under 2 hours, and when I stepped off into the tiny regional airport, barely 4 gates and a single baggage carousel, I almost walked right past her. She was maybe 70, small and upright in the way of women who've spent a lifetime refusing to be told they're old, and she was holding a piece of cardboard with my name written on it in thick block letters. Audrey. Nothing else. Just that. I stopped walking. My heart did something strange and painful in my chest. She looked at me, and her whole face changed, like she'd been holding her breath for years and had just finally let it out. Not a polite smile, a relieved one. "Your grandfather," she said, before I'd even reached her, "has been waiting 18 years to tell you the truth." I didn't know I had a grandfather. I didn't know there was a truth to tell. I knew only that a stranger had my name on a piece of cardboard, and that, for the first time I could remember, somebody had actually been waiting for me to arrive. Her name was Eleanor. Her hands were rough in the particular way of someone who'd canned her own vegetables and split her own firewood well into her 60s. But they were gentle when she took my bag from me and led me out to a faded green pickup truck parked at an angle near the exit, like she hadn't quite cared whether it fit between the lines. She didn't talk much on the drive, and I didn't have it in me to ask questions yet. I just watched North Carolina unfold outside the window, ridgelines softened blue with distance, fields gone gold at the edges, a kind of openness I'd never had access to growing up in a townhouse, with manicured hedges and a security gate. Something moved in my chest as we turned down a long gravel drive lined with old oaks, something I didn't have a name for yet, but that felt absurdly like recognition. The house at the end of that drive was 100 years old if it was a day, white clapboard with a deep wraparound porch and flower beds that had clearly been someone's quiet obsession for decades. And on that porch, in a rocking chair, sat a man. He was watching the truck before it even came to a stop. When I climbed out and he got a clear look at my face, he closed his eyes for a long moment. His jaw worked. When he opened them again, they were wet. He said my name once. Just once. Audrey. And the way he said it, like it was something he'd been afraid he'd never get to say out loud again, told me everything I needed to know before he'd explained a single thing. Whoever I was to this man, I had been missed, deeply, for a very long time. His name was Walter Ainsley. 73 years old, with a slow, careful way of standing that Eleanor helped along, but eyes that were sharp as broken glass, the eyes of a man who'd carried something heavy for a very long time and never once set it down. I didn't rush toward him. I didn't know him. But something in my body recognized something in his, the strange and immediate familiarity of a place you've never been but somehow already know the shape of. He extended his hand first, careful to treat me like the stranger I technically was, even though I clearly wasn't one to him. "Come inside," he said, his grip steady but gentle. "There's a lot I owe you, and I don't intend to waste any more time owing it." We sat at a kitchen table scarred with decades of use, the kind of table that had absorbed 1,000 ordinary dinners and at least a few hard conversations. Eleanor put a kettle on and moved around the kitchen with the quiet competence of someone who understood this moment needed warmth in the background and nothing more from her. Walter folded his weathered hands on the table and looked at me steadily, and he didn't ease into it. He'd clearly decided a long time ago that I deserved the whole truth without cushioning, whenever I finally arrived to hear it. My mother, his daughter, had gotten pregnant with me at 19. My biological father was a man named Dean Calloway, a quiet, serious young man who'd grown up 2 farms over, who Walter had liked and trusted the way a father trusts the man his daughter loves. My mother had loved him completely, the uncomplicated way you love someone when you're young enough to believe the world owes you a happy ending. But the man I'd grown up calling my father, the one who'd driven away from that curb without so much as a backward glance, had come into the picture when I was 4 months old. He was older. He had money. He had the kind of position in town that made people speak carefully around him. And he'd given my mother an ultimatum. Leave Dean behind entirely, cut every tie, move 3 states away, and raise this baby as his own, or lose his support and the life he was offering her completely. My mother had chosen security over truth, and Walter's voice didn't shake telling me that, but I could see exactly what it cost him. He'd fought her on it. He'd told her a child deserved to know where she came from, that no amount of money was worth that kind of erasure. She'd accused him of trying to ruin her chance at a stable life. They'd fought bitterly, over and over, until she did the thing that finally broke something in him for good. She cut off contact entirely, moved, made absolutely sure I never once heard the name Walter Ainsley in 18 years. He had letters. A whole box of them in the next room, written to me every single birthday, never sent because he had no address, no legal standing, nothing but a name he wasn't allowed to use. 34 letters. Some from birthdays, some from ordinary Tuesdays when he'd simply missed a person he'd never been allowed to meet. Then he told me about Dean. My biological father had never stopped asking about me, Walter said. He'd built a life eventually, married, but he'd never once closed that door. 3 years ago, he'd hired someone, quietly, to find out what had happened to the daughter he'd never been allowed to know. That search led back to Walter, who by then had given up on ever reaching me through my mother. Together they'd waited, because they both understood that the day I turned 18, the legal walls my mother had built around me for 2 decades would finally come down. Walter had reached out through a lawyer, asking only that I be given the choice to learn where I came from. He hadn't asked for custody, money, anything but the chance for me to know. And the answer that came back, the only answer he ever got, was a one-way plane ticket designed to look exactly like abandonment. Walter believed, and I came to believe it too, that it was my mother's way of finally setting down a guilt she'd been carrying, without ever once admitting it out loud. She couldn't say the truth to my face. So she sent me to it instead, dressed up as cruelty, because cruelty was easier for her than confession. I sat with all of that for a long time. The kettle had long since gone quiet. My tea sat untouched, gone cold in front of me. Eleanor had slipped out of the room at some point without my noticing, and it was just Walter and me at that table, and the whole weight of 18 years settling slowly over both of us. I asked where Dean was now. Walter looked at me carefully. "One phone call away," he said. "He's known you were coming. He's waiting to hear from you. In your time, not his. He's not going to push. He waited this long. He'll wait longer if that's what you need." I asked Walter why he never gave up. He was quiet for a moment, looking out the kitchen window at something I couldn't see. Then he said something I've carried with me every single day since. "Because you were real to me, Audrey, even when I couldn't reach you. Some people give up on what they can't see in front of them. I never could make myself do that." I stayed in Larkspur Hollow for 2 weeks that first visit. Eleanor had a room ready that wasn't decorated like a shrine, nothing strange or obsessive about it, just hopeful. Books on the shelf she thought I might like, based on the ones my mother had loved as a girl, before all of this. A quilt across the bed that Eleanor had pieced together the winter before, not knowing if I'd ever come to sleep under it, hoping anyway. It was the first room in my entire life that had been prepared for me with real care, and absolutely no expectation of anything in return. I met Dean on the 4th day. He was tall, gray, starting at his temples, and he stood in Walter's front yard with his hands jammed in his jacket pockets, like he didn't trust them not to shake, and he looked at me the exact same way Walter had, like something he'd long since stopped hoping for had just walked back into his life anyway. We talked for almost 4 hours that first afternoon, then more the next day. And the day after that. I'm 28 now. I have a relationship with both Walter and Dean that I protect fiercely, the way you protect the one thing in your life that nobody handed you out of obligation. I never went back to the people who drove away from that curb, not out of bitterness, though I'd be lying if I said bitterness wasn't part of it for a long time. I worked through that slowly, painfully, over years of therapy and quiet nights asking myself questions I didn't always like the answers to. But some doors, once you've honestly looked through them, simply don't need to be opened again. What my mother and stepfather meant as a dismissal turned out to be the only honest gift either of them ever gave me. They handed me a one-way ticket and believed they were closing a chapter. What they didn't understand, what I understand now with a certainty that doesn't waver, is that they were opening one instead. The destination didn't just change my life. It gave me the only version of it that was ever actually mine.